I'm fourth generation, so my family's been here since 1861. And we were in Northern California, north of Sacramento. And that's where a lot of the Asians first went because of the farmland and because of gold. And so I'm half Chinese, half Japanese. And even though I'm fourth generation and my I was born here, my parents were born here, my grandparents were born here, my grandparents came here when they were young. We were treated really bad, and we had a lot of racism, and I had a lot of racism growing up, and we had a Ku Klux Klan, and they used to chase me and everything. And so I was really ashamed of being Asian. I just wanted to live. So when we started over 20 years ago, it was really in response to a lot of the hate crimes that were occurring against Asians. And so at the time, Tianmin Li had been murdered through a hate crime. He had been stabbed multiple times, in Tustin High School. He was skating at the tennis courts, and two white supremacists killed him. And that had happened also at the same time. Asian American students, high school students, and UCI students were being stopped and harassed by the police, and photos were being taken of them and placed in this book that were suspected gang members. And these were like honor students, So if you see, you're both at UC Irvine, on Culver, you would see every Asian American, especially male students who were in a Honda Civic, were stopped, placed on the ground, and tied behind their back. And we just were, and same, in Anaheim, Fountain Valley, all this was happening. I think the Asian community really needs to self-reflect on its own anti-Blackness that's in the community. Also our racism, towards Blacks, and our racism towards each other. We have to look at our own history and how it's so similar to African Americans historically. But also we have to look at, I think there has to be a lot of unlearning around, some of the things that we carry around anti-Blackness, but also we need to be educated on history of civil rights and different things, especially our first generation. African Americans stood up for refugees and immigrants. The first African American senator was against the Chinese Exclusion Act. Time and time again, the African American community has stood up for us. Yes, we've had different conflicts, and there's racism and discrimination on both sides, but we have to really unlearn a lot and have deeper conversations to, just how API communities roll in being an ally, not to take up space and not to take away from the voices of Black Lives Matter, but be allies. And how do we support that? How, as organizations, do we become allies and stand up and voice so that community members who may be afraid to feel brave enough? We know a lot of 1.5 second generation, business leaders who are afraid to say, we stand with Black Lives Matter, because maybe, older generation are like, you don't do that. And so as organizations, if we all come together, we're stronger in our voice, and we stand together and say, we need to address this all together, and we need to be very honest about what's happening, and we need to stand up, because this is just wrong. It's just wrong. Just because we're not being targeted right now, when Black Americans are affected, everybody is affected. We could stand and say, oh, well, it's not us, but yes, it is us, because when one population, when one community is affected, it affects us all. When there's racial discrimination, when there's, economic injustice, or, all the different social justice issues, it impacts all of us. I am really inspired by the young folks and the future generations right now. With all of the protesting and all of the gatherings for Black Lives Matter, and seeing these young people who have taken leadership in that, I'm just so hopeful for the future, because they are pushing, worldwide, but especially in the US, they're pushing for change. And and they're, you know, looking at racial injustice, and, you know, they're finally, I think, pushing so many systems to make change. So the future generations, our biggest hope, is our brightest hope, because they're the ones who are going to change all the systemic racism and all of these structural issues that have been going on for years that there's been complacency about.